Hi, everyone. This is Anna van Loefferen from the Wilfried Martens Center of European Studies. I'm the Communications and Press Officer here. Like the past weeks, this is actually already now our 5th event, and this week we'll be talking about a particular subject that maybe is slightly less on the front of the news these days, and it's actually disinformation campaigns. Because in effect, the acuteness of the COVID pandemic that we've been seeing for the past 2 months is very much on everyone's minds, of course. And there's a lot of drama involved, absolutely natural around these special circumstances. And a lot of the science keeps evolving every week. Even our researchers, our scientists, our epidemiologists are learning more and more constantly about the virus, and therefore also we need to update the information constantly to make sure that citizens all across the world are getting accurate information that can save lives and really make a meaningful impact on getting our societies back on track. In that regard, I'm very happy to be today joined by two people who will be instrumental in getting us to understand exactly how the European Union, but also journalists on the ground, are coping with this issue of disinformation in particular, because a lot of journalists, they are essential workers, just as doctors, cashiers, taxi drivers are these days. Journalists are extremely essential in this day and age for us to get the information that we need, and that's absolutely 100% reliable. But of course, for them, this is extremely difficult circumstances too, to even get that information out there. So joining me today is, on the one hand, Raimonda Miglinate, who is the Information and Communication Officer at the European External Action Service in the Strategic Communications and Information Analysis Division. Welcome, Raimonda. Thanks so much for joining us. And as well, I have with me Jean-Paul Martouz, who is an emerite journalist and columnist at Le Soir, and also a guest lecturer at the Université Catholique de Louvain. So welcome to the both of you. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope we're going to have a very fruitful discussion today, and I want to thank as well our online viewers for joining us here today. You are going to be very important for us as well, because we will be expecting your online questions. So you can do that as a comment on Facebook. I have some colleagues who will let me know what you guys are talking about on the Facebook chat, and we'll respond to your questions in live with our two speakers. So please, first off, we're going to just shoot some questions to my two speakers, and then we'll be taking your questions around 20 minutes to 15 before the end of our talk, which is going to last 45 minutes. The live obviously is absolutely available on Facebook after it's done, and it will also be uploaded later on our YouTube account, so you will definitely be able to again share this conversation later. So first off, my first question is for you, Raimonda. Could you please explain us exactly what the European External Action Service is, and specifically what eStratCom is, how long it's existed, and what exactly its mandate is? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna. I'm really honored and humbled to speak to this audience today, more so as I'm doing it from my living room. But I guess that's the reality we all live nowadays in. So I work, as you rightly said, at the External Action Service, but more specifically at the team with eStratCom Task Force. And we are the team that you may know from one of our products, which is EU versus Disinfo website and Facebook and Twitter channels. So this is a team that was established back in 2015 when, by the decision of the European Council, when the heads of European countries stressed the need to challenge Russia's ongoing disinformation campaigns. And the creation of the team was a result of that decision. So it was a decision made at the very highest level in the EU, with the very clear and the very specific language, challenge Russia's ongoing disinformation campaigns. And it has been guiding our work since. I have to say here that we work in three main strands because, of course, my colleagues who were at the inception of the team, they had to think long and hard about how does one exactly challenge disinformation campaigns. And after some consultations with the experts and wider community, sort of three main strands of work emerged. One is that EU should make its own communication more effective, especially with the focus of Eastern Partnership countries. So if audiences should be more resilient to disinformation, for example, targeting relations between Ukraine and Europe or Europe's Eastern Partnership Program, they need to know really well what that actually is. The second strand of work is to strengthen free and independent media, again with the focus to Eastern Partnership region. And of course, because this is one of the best and most effective ways to keep society resilient to disinformation, is to have trusted and independent media, which upholds fundamental journalistic standards. And finally, the third strand of work, and this is, I think, what we are most known for probably, is to raise awareness about the pro-Kremlin disinformation problem. And we run an advocacy campaign, which is known as EU versus Disinfo. So we write, we analyze the disinformation ecosystem, we write articles, it's all public. And one of the key elements in our work is a publicly available database where we collect specific examples of pro-Kremlin disinformation. It is all searchable, it is all available online. And today we already have over 8,000 of such examples and almost 400 examples of disinformation related to COVID-19.
That's quite a lot of work to process, I'm sure, in this database. And this is all like artificial intelligence data, kind of, or this is like manual labor that you're putting into it? Right.
It's something in between, really. But once the team started, it did rely a lot on sort of scanning the media environment and on the expertise of the people. Now we have made substantial steps to professionalize both our media monitoring and analysis capabilities. So we do monitor pro-Kremlin disinformation sources in over 20 languages, and we try to collect and analyze them. But so the human element in this is, of course, very important.
All right, yeah, so a lot of ant work, I'm sure. And how many people are you on such a team to have to go through these 80,000 stories and the 400 on COVID?
Well, the team, the size of the team, of course, shifted through the years, and our work is we enjoy a strong support from the EU member states, and a big part of the team are actually what in the EU speakers are called seconded national experts, meaning experts delegated from the member states. The team, not only them, of course, but currently we are 16 people doing the work.
That's not a lot. 16 people. All right, great. Then actually another kind of ant worker that I'm also curious to know more about. Jean-Paul, you know what it's like to be a journalist, obviously, in this day and age. Could you walk us through what it's like to be a journalist in this particular time? Is it more challenging than it was perchance in the past?
Yeah, I think it's certainly one of the most challenging missions in journalism. In 40 years of journalism, I think that the coronavirus crisis is one of the most difficult to cover. Because first of all, it's a total story. It involves everyone in the newsroom. It's not just the war correspondents or the legal correspondents, or it's everyone is on board. Everyone is on team, from sports writers, the culture writers, everyone is there. And then we have to resort to so many experts outside of the newsroom, because we discover with this crisis that we don't have necessarily the expertise that we tend to have when we cover news stories. We need to rely on experts, or many experts in lots of areas. We have to discover the difference in between a virologist or an epidemiologist, or we go into completely uncharted territory in many newsrooms. Some newsrooms, of course, are better equipped, and we have seen during the crisis that a number of high quality journalists have been practiced by mainstream media, and that they have access to expertise within their own ranks, or the capacity to get the expertise outside. But it's a major challenge also, because there are so many uncertainties about the coronavirus that it tends to open up a lot of space for information which we might describe as either misinformation, meaning false stories that are not necessarily meant to harm, but also disinformation. It opens a space for groups or states or to use the uncertainties, the emotions, the lack of trust, sometimes also in official information, the anguish that this story creates in order to push disinformation, meaning information which is deliberately false and deliberately fabricated to produce a political or other effect and harm people or groups. So this is a very challenging moment, also because it's a global story. It started, I mean, somewhere and it hurts everywhere. So it's something that means that we have to rely on a huge system of information, knowing that in many countries in the world there's censorship. Governments try to prevent journalists from doing their work, so creating voids, vacuum of information that are really dangerous, because we know, and everybody knows, and the medical profession knows it very well, that this is a global story, a global problem. We need to have accurate information in real time as possible from everywhere, every corner of the world.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving us a better perspective of what's it like for journalists to work these days. And you in particular, you're very lucky and privileged to be at Le Soir, which is a big newspaper in Belgium. But what about the situation as well for freelance journalists? I'm guessing it must be even harder these days to get to sources, to find funding. Probably in this day and age, it must be harder for them than in other times to get their information and to get their stories out there.
Yeah, there's a real issue for journalism, because this crisis has revealed something which is distinct from the crisis, which is the crisis within the news business for many, many years. There has been a weakening of the press in many countries due to the rise of the internet and other issues. And this crisis has revealed that many news organizations today came very weakened to the crisis. So we have seen a number of news organizations that are in big trouble, financial troubles, and it might really lead to a number of bankruptcies or crises within news organizations. There are a number of news organizations that are quite strong and can sort of navigate very well into the crisis, like New York Times or the BBC, those kinds of news organizations. But it has really increased the disparities between journalism, between, on the one side, those huge, well-known news organizations have been able to build their own business model, even in online environment, and others that were weakened by all those factors that I mentioned, commercial, business, and internet. But also the worst of the worst, I mean, in this situation are the freelancers, because they don't have the capacity to resist, like many others in other professions, the economic aspect to it. And many freelancers have a real difficulty to cope with the crisis, because no one asks them to, and no one pays them to cover the story, or that less. And you have seen a number of news organizations have tried to reduce salaries, or some have not resorted to the same people. So yes, this is a crisis in the business and in the profession of journalism. But despite this crisis, which has roots in the coronavirus impact, but also elsewhere, as I said, we have seen in the last 4 months a sort of a reaffirmation of the need for quality journalism, because the people need to know. And we have seen huge rises in the audiences of the best public service journalism. For instance, I've seen in the UK, for instance, the BBC and a few other TV channels have had something like close to 100% rise in their audiences. Even among the younger population, we tended not to watch those programs. So I think that we can certainly come out of this crisis, I hope, with the realization that journalism, good ethical journalism, matters, because it saves lives.
Great, thank you so much for giving us a bit more information on that as well. And as well, before you distinguished what is misinformation versus disinformation, because indeed disinformation is this real intent of pushing out there, rebuilding a narrative, shifting the blame, which we have seen from certain states around the world doing this, like China did, trying to deflect the blame from the origin of the virus, trying to redefine it, stating it wasn't originated in China, etc. We've seen these stories, obviously. Raimonda, in particular, I wanted to focus a bit more on Russian disinformation, because Russian disinformation has been going on for even a longer time than Chinese disinformation has. Would you say that the current disinformation spreading around the pandemic is typical of your average work, or is there something of a different nature that you've witnessed is happening at the moment?
Well, I need to preface this by saying that it is hard to quantify disinformation. Of course, we count the numbers of examples we have, but it is quite hard to translate to numbers. And there's something to say about the nature of the topic itself, about this pandemic, and there's reasons why the WHO called it an infodemic. Because the subject itself, this disease, it's a highly alarming subject that touches each of us personally. So it creates emotions, and we know that content spreads, especially online, when it evokes emotions. It is a highly complex topic, and it requires specific scientific knowledge. For example, especially on social media, it is not immediately clear whether what we read is false or true. And I want to just support Jean-Paul here. I think especially in these circumstances, we understand how vital indeed is the professional media, which actually checks the facts and provides accurate information. And finally, the situation that we have is constantly developing. It means there's a lot of uncertainty, and we as consumers of information, we tend to rely on fast and quick answers. But the truth is that in this situation, it's not always possible to have them really, really quick. I mean, science takes effort and science takes time. And this uncertainty creates a certain additional space for various conspiracy theories to proliferate. And of course, so as a topic itself, COVID pandemic is a very fertile ground for disinformation and conspiracy theories, and certain actors and pro-Kremlin actors, of course, exploit it for their means. The situation that we face in terms of pandemic, of course, is unique, but this is not the first time Kremlin actors have engaged in health-related disinformation. For example, in a research from 2018, George Washington University found that so-called Russian trolls linked to the Internet Research Agency, which you might know better as St. Petersburg's troll factory, were tweeting in the vaccine debate on Twitter, tweeting both pro-vaccine and anti-vaccine messages. And of course, one could ask, themselves, why would that matter? This is not a geopolitical topic per se, but precisely because it can be used as this wedge issue to promote discord in the society. And we, of course, seen that as well. As I said, we now have over 400 almost, I think it's 396 examples of pro-Kremlin disinformation. We started observing first examples at the end of January. And there's also, across the disinformation ecosystem, there are various conspiracy theories, and they're especially dangerous because they are health-related. So that can have real consequences to people's well-being, but also there's this larger goal to sow discord and undermine trust within the societies. For example, when the audiences are being told that the whole pandemic is a hoax created by Bill Gates or secret elites which control world governments, that vaccines are not actually vaccines, but aims to control or even reduce world population, that does something fundamental to the trust, both in public health authorities, but in authorities in general. And that can have repercussions, of course, long after the actual pandemic is over.
Indeed, there's a lot of food for thought there with all the different conspiracy theories that we've been able to see. Sometimes it feels a bit, though, counterproductive. You imagine that some of these, obviously, they might be shooting themselves in the foot. I mean, for instance, the very interesting case of the Chinese doctor who was the first one, the whistleblower, to say when the disease was going to be much more of a very strong repercussions, that it could become an epidemic. He was then asked to retract what he had said on Chinese social media. And finally, very sadly, he passed away, I think, end of January. And then the Chinese authorities tried again to downplay this, as in he didn't die of that disease, but the Chinese people were not getting fooled. And there was apparently a very strong backlash from Chinese populations against this particular discourse that was a bit too thick, probably for the Chinese people to see it immediately, that this was obvious propaganda, basically. Yeah.
We do see something, I guess, in a similar terms. For example, when it comes to Russian state-controlled TV channels. So at the early on in January, we could observe these conspiracy theories about a virus as a biological weapon of the U.S. Being spread around, with even suggestions that it targets just particular races. Or spread on these type of channels. However, as situation developed in Russia itself, I have to say that the information on the federal channels got more sober, to the extent where I think it was Russia's health minister who went on air and said that this is a natural occurring virus, so to speak. So in a sense, for some of the official pro-Kremlin media, it is a challenge, because unlike in other events that were followed or accompanied by large disinformation campaigns, if you think about the downing of MH17 or Salisbury poisoning, this is something that affects all of us, including people in Russia. So it's not so easy just to feed any kind of information, because at the end, you need actual information for the population to cooperate. So we do see a little bit of that disinformation boomerang, I guess, coming back.
And actually, there's a very, very quick follow-up question from social media that's interesting with regard to what you just said. Because I know that your mandate is obviously to look at Russian disinformation, but there is an interesting question about, some people are asking obviously about the Chinese disinformation. Are there teams inside the EAS that also look at these particular attempts of disinformation coming from China? Or is it really just focused for now on the East, on Russia? Sorry.
So our team historically always focused on Russia, because this is our mandate. But of course, as the situation develops, we are aware of. And in general, I would say even before the COVID started, there was this recognition that disinformation actors proliferate. There are new states engaging in these kind of activities, non-state actors as well. So the institution as such is aware and developing those kind of capabilities as well.
Right, that's very interesting. Now I want to turn again to Jean-Paul, because Jean-Paul, you've been a journalist for already a bit of a while, and you in particular already reported back in the Cold War. So you've seen this information big scale, and I was wondering if you could maybe walk us through, from a historical perspective, how you've seen this evolving through this day and age in particular, maybe, but also you've seen it from the end of the Cold War up until now. So could you walk us through that?
Well, I had a comment today, for instance, that as a mainstream journalist, I'm not really affected directly by Russian or Chinese or other forms of disinformation. We tend to rely on mainstream sources, reliable sources, news agencies, and we hear about those disinformation attempts through our public, for instance. So even to our friends and colleagues who send us examples of stories I've seen on social media, because the social media are really the area where those kinds of stories proliferate. I saw a recent survey by the Reuters Institute of Oxford University showing that 88% of the disinformation circulates on social media, and only 7% on mainstream media. So we get calls from or email from public asking us to analyze what they have seen and double check. And this is a very interesting phenomenon. It means that there are two different spheres today, increasingly, between the people who tend to rely on traditional mainstream media, most of them trying to respect ethical standards, and others who live in a different world where there's no real rules. It's just accessing information without any filter. and it has a consequence for democracy. And I think it's something which is quite different from what I experienced when I was a younger journalist in the 80s during the Cold War, where I covered the East-West confrontation, especially in Latin America, for instance. And we were, as journalists, directly contacted sometimes by the KGB, for instance, trying to present their case on a number of issues. And we needed to see more directly, for instance, what they called, or others called, the active measures. For instance, accusations that there had been something wrong committed by the US, for instance, in Central America, or the fact that, for instance, there was a famous hoax in the mid 80s about the fabrication of the AIDS in our US military laboratory. And those kind of things were quite crude to some extent. It was rather easy to debunk those things. Today, we have a question of the avalanche of disinformation, which we have big difficulty to confront. And it's something which is quite new. It's linked to, of course, social media. And ethically, there's an issue for us too. I mean, of course, we have to double check, we have to fact check, and we help people to navigate better through the jungle of disinformation and misinformation and malinformation. But at the same time, we have to wonder whether we don't play the game of the disinformer, where we reproduce what they do, even to debunk and contradict what they do, and we sort of amplify their message. This is something which, for me, is part of an ethical lesson. Should I really mention this rumor or this accusation, or if I do it, I will provide sort of a bigger public to disinformation, knowing that many people are using this kind of disinformation or misinformation to reinforce sort of what they already believe in. So it's a very complex process in which we are involved as journalists ethically, choosing when and how we are going to get into that business of debunking disinformation attempts.
Indeed, it kind of sounds as though it's become much more difficult, basically, your work today, because like you say, you're spending a lot of your time debunking, then wondering whether it is worth your time to debunk, because you're indeed giving a bigger platform to the ones that you don't want to give a platform to, obviously. So there's a lot of ethical questions in there.
Just one addition. And also, it's something that democratic governments should be aware of and recognize it. I mean, democracies also can disinform and can also try to hide their mistakes, errors. The fact, for instance, that in Europe has been not that much preparation in many countries in terms of providing masks or testing kits or whatever. It's something which our governments try to sort of, try to hide or try to explain in a way which is necessary the truth. But it's an issue which is linked to the emergency. But more basically, we have seen in the last 20 years a number of cases where Western governments have been lying about their intentions and what they were doing. And I think this is a lesson that we have to draw from the crisis. We know today that by providing accurate information, we are saving lives. But also by providing accurate information, we are opening up the space for better democracy. And we are, by opening up the space for better democracy, we are sort of narrowing the space for disinformation coming from radical groups and from states. So this is something that we have to think a lot about. I mean, the transparency is something which is absolutely something which democracies should adhere to and accept that they make mistakes, we make mistakes. And this is the best way for them perhaps to recreate that form of trust that's so necessary today in order to fight on a long-term basis any disinformation attempt by foreign countries. Trust is the major sort of a set that we have in democracies in order to combat any attempts to sort of destabilize our systems, creating chaos, confusion, coming from hostile powers or hostile groups.
Yes, that's very interesting. And actually, I like that you tie it in with the current pandemic that's going on, because in a way, like you say, rightfully say, disinformation's been done on all sides. It's been on for a while. It's been going on for a while. And I think we're more and more, of course, aware that this is a problem that we absolutely need to tackle. And yet many policymakers, citizens, grassroots organizations are also struggling to actually find responses to tackle the real problem that is disinformation. And in a way, do you both feel maybe that COVID-19 is maybe the very acute, very visible symptom of this problem that we're having with fighting disinformation? Could it maybe be the wake-up call that we Europeans need to really get our act together finally on tackling the issue of disinformation? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, on both of you. Maybe Ramonda, you want to start on this?
Well, from speaking from the perspective of our team, as I've mentioned, it was established in 2015. So in a sense, our existence started with the crisis, the one in Ukraine, and it continued our mission was strengthened in a way when it was clear that disinformation can affect elections as well. But all of these experiences also means that we come to this situation today with certain structures already in place. So we're not really starting from zero. I guess my point here is I think Europe has been awakened for some time now. Of course, COVID is an unprecedented situation, but there are certain things in place already. For example, in the end of 2018, EU adopted an action plan against disinformation, which sort of talks about this holistic approach to tackling it. It talks about the better institutional capabilities to monitor and to analyze it. It talks also about the better coordination between the member states, better exchange of information. We are doing that via a system that's called Rapid Alert System. It talks about responsibility of industry, such as social media platforms, to take certain measures. And as you also may know, we had the colleagues in the Commission had a code of conduct, so sort of voluntary commitment from the platforms to increase ads transparency, and that was sort of a basis for the platforms to take additional measures. Of course, there are still significant gaps and much more has to be done, but I mean, some steps were already taken. The same goes for example, various media literacy initiatives. So we're not empty-handed in a way, but it is true that the COVID situation also lays bare the shortages and shortcomings that we have, and where we need to do better in terms of monitoring and analysis and understanding of disinformation. We need the platforms to be more efficient and more transparent. Importantly, we need to be better at our own communications, among other things. And I am hopeful that this probably will lead to some positive change.
Thanks for that. Jean-Paul, do you want to also give us your point of view on this?
Yeah, I think it's perhaps more of a wake-up call for journalists because to some extent it's an opportunity for quality media, public service media, to demonstrate that they really are absolutely necessary in a time of crisis, because this is one of the first times that we have such a crisis involving so many people, anyone, I would say, and raising issues that are not just issues of ideology or income or social issues. It's about life and death issue. So it creates a real constituency that starts to really understand that the quality of information will determine whether they are going to have the life protected, that they will have better access to health services, that some journalists will be able to even ask difficult questions to governments in order to make sure that they might correct what they have been doing. For instance, we have seen, thanks to journalism, changes in new ways of counting, for instance, the number of deaths, which has an impact on the way you address the impact of the crisis. For instance, on the question of the care homes for older people, for instance, this has been brought by journalists doing their work, trying to understand what's happening, trying to check the information coming from the government, bring to. And I think this new phenomenon that we have been forced to do our job much better than we tended to do, much more seriously, because there's an issue here of life and death, is slowly recreates a kind of trust and credibility between a larger part of the public and the media. And I think so this crisis can help sort of rebuild a number of institutions like the media, and we have been, sometimes through our own mistakes, we have been victims of media bashing for so many years. It is something which I think will change with the crisis, as well as, again, a respect for science, for rational approach to issues, which has been, attacked in many countries in the last years. And not even mention the current US administration, which has been very, slow to acknowledge the need for rational and scientific approach. And the tension between Mr. Trump and Mr. Fauci, for instance, is a symbol of the tensions between between really the need to address the issue by providing to citizens with the correct, accurate information, sometimes even acknowledging, and we have to acknowledge it, the uncertainties and the fact we are not able to quite often say this is the truth or this is what's correct. But this is a key moment. We can either continue like this and rebuild a number of institutions that will be respected again, not only the media, but also the scientific establishment or the medical system, the people that are doing our work. Protecting us in professions that tended not to be recognized as necessary and so essential to our societies. I think this is the kind of a positive view on it, and I choose to be positive on it. If not, if we don't manage that well, if we are overwhelmed by disinformation or by malinformation, meaning information that tries to harm people, then of course it's a nightmarish scenario. But I hope we have the capacity to go towards the positive side of it.
Great. I like the glass half full approach as well. I'm more of that side, but less about my own opinion. Let's go on with online questions, actually, because we have quite a few on Facebook. And one of them is more of an institutional question. Do you think there is any room for structured and institutionalized cooperation on disinformation between the United States and the European Union? And if yes, how? I think, Raimonda, this is more a question for you probably, if you've heard talks in the ES about this, particularly about working more in cooperation with our transatlantic partner. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, we do stay in touch with colleagues from the US, also researchers from many US universities. I think there's this community of people who are really interested in disinformation as a topic. So definitely there is some connection there. We're also cooperating quite closely with the G7, because G7 has its own mechanism also to monitor and counter disinformation. So there's professional exchange at the professional level. Of course, it can always be strengthened and improved. Sky's the limit, really. I guess we may be seeing that in the future, but we do try to keep in touch and sort of update each other.
Okay, that's good to know. I also have more of a question from our policy director, Roland Freudenstein, to Jean-Paul. Jean-Paul, don't you think Russia and China are ultimately shooting themselves in the foot and counteracting their mask and equipment PPE and personal PR? The disinfo on COVID-19 from those countries may actually have backfired. Wouldn't you think so?
I think that the attempt by China to offer a narrative, which is a narrative that, we perhaps studied the whole drama, but we were quick to inform you. We were quick to take the right decisions. We are now generous and helping you. Something which seems to be very attractive for many in terms of communications. But I don't think it's working, because the way everything has been evolving, the fact that we have to recognize, and the Chinese have to acknowledge, that it took them a lot of work. It took them a lot of work to recognize at the right moment the perils of what was happening in their own country, the fact that they suppressed information, that they sanctioned whistleblowers like this Dr. Li Guanglang, something which, of course, will be there. They will not be able to just sort of delete that part of the timeline. And I think it's something which they try to do. And I think it's a mistake. And the fact that they tend to tell us now that to some extent their system is working better than democracies to confront the crisis, I think also is shooting themselves in the foot. And the fact also that some of their ambassadors, even for instance, refer to conspiracy theories about the fact that this virus would have been brought by U.S. military or created by the U.S., something which I think it's very, very, very dangerous for them, because they could have had a sort of a communications policy which would have acknowledged what had happened and agreed that the timeline was not that good for them in the first place. But the way they do it in some way by implying that they are winning the battle, that they are moving their cards, I mean, on the geopolitical chessboard, that they are basically better than the others. I think it's a mistake on their part to do so. I mean, personally, and I hear in many countries, not just in European countries, where there is a level of anger towards the Chinese government for this kind of propaganda, but also in Latin American countries, because I have been working in Latin America for many years. I still get information from Latin American journalists, and they also see that this is something which will backlash against the Chinese government if they continue on that road.
All right, thank you very much for that response. And Raimonda, there's been actually a few requests on Facebook for that report that everyone's been talking about, the one that was mentioned in Politico, that was supposed to come out, I think Tuesday afternoon. And so they're all asking, like, where is it? Can I read it? I would love to read it. So maybe you can tell our viewers a bit when they can expect to get their hands on that report.
Well, we at the University of Disinfo, we always insist on writing public things. We are a communications team, so we never try to hide our work. But of course, having said that, we do some internal reporting to inform our colleagues. And the COVID was unprecedented in a way here as well, because we have published on University of Disinfo sort of a broader outlook at the disinformation environment. So looking not just at the pro-Kremlin sources, but the wider environment. And we are preparing the next update. It's being fine-tuned. It's gonna come out. Stay tuned.
Okay, that's good news. Thank you, because there was a lot of teasing, so now we're all excited to get it. There's a lot of, as you can see, enthusiasm to read it, also on my part. And as well, I encourage our viewers to definitely check out the EU versus Disinfo blog, because every day there's at least 1 or 2 articles about specific targeted disinformation campaigns that are being debunked and shown for what they are by the East Stratcom teams. And it's really enlightening, I have to say. We're almost rounding up towards the end of our event, but maybe I would just like to ask the both of you if there was anything that you needed to be even better at your job right now, especially in these days of COVID-19. What would you think that you would really need? Like more funding, basically, to do your work, more manpower? What would it be? You go, Raimonda, please let me know.
Well, funding and manpower, of course, sounds very nice, but I think at the core of it is our understanding that we cannot really deal with this alone. We will never solve the issue alone. And I know it sounds like a very general speak, but this is a whole of society approach that we need. We need media, we need investigative journalism, we need civil society engagement, we need responsibility from the businesses, for example, Facebook's, Twitter's, Google's, and so on and so forth. So I'm really hoping that this understanding that we all are dealing with this challenge and with the effects of it is going to continue in the future and sort of strengthen a collective effort just to challenge disinformation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Jean-Paul, what would you need?
I think, of course, funding for many of the media that I mentioned that are in deep trouble, and for freelancers in particular. But it's not only funding. I think that we have to develop what has been developing in the last 20 years. It's this kind of global journalism where journalists from everywhere in the world are working together, exchanging information, helping each other to identify fake news, so to help to get information. So there's something which for me is fundamental, is to have a better concept of a globalized world, meaning a globalized journalism. Training is also an issue. We have discovered, I mean, humbly, modestly, during that crisis, that we needed to have more journalists that are specialized in medicine, specialized in statistics, specialized in mathematics. And then we need to refocus perhaps the training of journalists toward those kinds of scientific sectors. And I think we also need media literacy. I mean, I guess if we want to make sure that disinformation or misinformation doesn't have space, we have to also work from the bottom up, helping the audience to understand what is the difference between an information which has been produced in honestly, but also with all the tools that are and the practices of our ethical journalism, and on the other side, how to recognize a fake for a fake. I think there's something which certainly should be a fabulous project between all the sectors in society: education, journalism, and also the political powers. I mean, we can work together to have a society where quality information is recognized as a necessary tool for citizens to understand how to behave as citizens, but also to protect themselves now. Because again, information is an issue of our life and death at the time of the coronavirus.
Thank you so much, Jean-Paul. I think that brings it nicely to a nice conclusion as well. Like you said, media literacy is extremely important. There are a lot of grassroots organizations out there who have Twitter accounts that I really recommend everyone follow. Stop Fake, of course, EU versus Disinfo. There's the SIFT method that I've heard as well from Mike Caulfield. There are many ways out there that, especially if you see something, a social media post that enrages you, you really have to stop and wonder why it upsets you so much, because there's obviously something that might be wrong with that post. So it's always good to dig deeper, find alternative sources if need be, not alternative facts, stick to the fact. There are no alternative facts. And yeah, just rely on your good old sources, and especially follow Jean-Paul Marteau's on Twitter, because he also follows a lot of disinformation campaigns and calls them out. And I really encourage you as well to read his column on Le Soir, which I also read. So thank you so much for the both of you for joining me, and as well, thanks so much for the work of EU versus Disinfo and eStratcom Remonda, because those are important institutional divisions of this exact same work that needs to be continued, strengthened, and furthered in the EU, but also in the neighboring countries of the Eastern Partnership, in the Balkans, because they're very much as well subject to Russian disinformation, and Chinese disinformation now, especially in the Balkans, is extremely strong. So we will continue working on this, the Martin Center. I want to thank my online viewership as well for being with me and our guest speakers today. Thank you so much for the both of you. And we'll follow each other still on social media and follow this through. Thank you so much. Thanks. Have a nice day.